David Bohm Seminar, Sunday, March 22nd, 1992, 10 o'clock morning session, Oak Grove School, Ojai, California.
Good morning, everybody. How are you?
Good. Well, yesterday we were finishing up on the question of the relationship of mind and matter. And I think we shouldn't, I'll say something about this morning, but we shouldn't dwell too long on it. It's not, from here on, it's not really the main point, but there are more things that follow. There are things that we have to do that are more significant. But you see, one could say of mind or spirit that it is relatively subtle. The body is manifest, or matter is manifest. The word manifest means in Latin it can be held in the hand. And subtle means, its root is subtext, meaning finely woven. And you could think that the mind, or the thought process or something, makes nets that are finer and finer, but and can get unlimited fineness. Now, and it's interesting to consider the word spirit, inspiration, its breath, and also the wind. It's something which is subtle, you see, relatively. And you can see the wind moving through the trees. You don't see the wind, but you see the trees moving, and you say there's something subtle moving them. And this is the sort of image that you might try to get. Now, but of course, the wind is the movement of air, which, although subtle, is still manifest, and you can feel it. And then we have still more subtle net, where we think of the thing is made of atoms and made of electrons, protons, neutrons, and eventually movement of fields, and and perhaps going on indefinitely, you see. So now, one might think now that one view is to say it's all one substance, as it were, but we have different degrees of manifest and subtle. And the mind is on the subtle side, moving toward greater and greater subtlety with no limit. Matter is on the manifest side. And we can see that the subtle can affect the manifest, with this analogy of the wind blowing in the trees. Now, the manifest must have some effect on the subtle, if the mind is subtle, in order for the mind to become aware or perceptive of matter. But it is not conditioned, is what I'm saying. That you see, there's a difference between having an effect and being conditioned. That when thought takes place, then the movement is conditioned in the sense that we have powerful effects tending to limit the movement and forcing it in certain directions. So the content which is experienced then conditions the thought process. Now, the view might be that as you get to something more subtle, then it would be more or less rigid, also subtle. It would be more mobile, and would not hold the conditioning, you see. So the suggestion is then that moving in that direction, we move toward the unconditioned, that perception, insight, truth, and eventually must have their origin there, if they're to be unconditioned. Right. Now, I don't know if we want to go very much further into that. I mean, that was just simply to finish it off. But if you want to discuss it for a little while.
Definition of conditioning.
What?
Could you give a definition of conditioning?
Well, conditioning, you see, that we discussed that from the very beginning, that when a thought process takes place, it goes into the memory. The memory holds it, and the memory reacts, you see, so that reaction conditions the next thought, or all the thoughts. Now, there may be a perception which has to have there must be some relation between the active perception and what is perceived, the matter that is perceived, but it would not, we're suggesting it would not condition the subtle mind. It would not leave a fixed record which would a very strong record which would affect the way it would go from there on. Say, moving toward pleasure or pain or compelled to distort. See, so the conditioning, unless it's understood and dealt with properly, will interfere with the action of truth, and with the insight. It will tend to prevent it from acting properly.
Conditioning is the tendency of the memory to move from one memory to the next.
Well, conditioning is, first of all, that when the memory responds, it responds with the movement which has already been recorded, you see. It may produce a feeling or a thought or a muscular tension or an action.
And that builds to the next.
It builds to the next, and that associates. You see, they're all in the memory, and they're all in that soup, and all associating together.
Chain of...
Yeah.
You're saying there's another movement that wouldn't rely on the past movement to interpret or react.
Yes, but it would be able to pick up the information as to what the material.
Not the only way that this could operate.
Yeah. That's the suggestion. Now, I want to go back into this conditioning and why it's such a peculiar difficulty. See, if we go back to this idea, there's a thick bundle of nerves between the intellectual center and the emotional center. And I might suggest that if there were no interference by memory, perhaps the intellectual center already will, when there's an emotion, it might already see whether it's appropriate or not, and as it were, send a message to the emotional center accordingly along that thick bundle of nerves, which is genetically constituted. And
If there wasn't any conditioning, that would be
and perhaps that's the suggestion. You see, that there would be proprioception, that the intellect would know that it had affected the emotions and vice versa.
It's the conditioning that causes it inappropriate.
Yes. Now, you see, why is that? You see that? You see, the conditioning is memory. You see, now, the conditioning may condition you that a certain situation or thought reacts, or to produce a certain feeling, felt, right? Anger, fear, whatever it may be, pleasure.
Is it conditioning itself that's inappropriate, or the nature of it?
Yeah, the conditioning may be appropriate, but I'm saying that the conditioning gives rise to a reflex action which may be appropriate or may not. It's not intelligent enough to know, right?
How are we going to find out?
Well, it's clear. It's like a machine. How can it know whether, you see, a certain reaction may have been appropriate in the past when you set up the conditioning. A situation may be different, but similar enough to operate the conditioning again. It won't work. Huh?
In a machine, if you find that there are places that are wearing out, at the wrong speed, or things are breaking, or the machine isn't producing the desired result, you say there's something wrong in the machine.
Yeah, but you could also say that this machine being programmed in a certain way, that's like it's conditioning. We have conditioned it. You see, it hasn't conditioned itself. But this machine will have a response which is suitable for a certain situation. When the situation changes, it will no longer be able to respond properly for a very different one. Is that clear?
That's the conditioning.
Yeah. So the program can only respond in a certain range of situations. Otherwise, it responds inappropriately.
What's needed would be some way of monitoring the reflex the whole time.
Yes, well, let's go a bit more slowly, you see. Now, similarly, the conditioning, it doesn't make a program, it isn't written beforehand, but it's very similar in its action, except that the thought process conditions itself, as it reacts and responds.
The nature of thought to be conditioned by its own experience.
Yes.
Like a learning program in a computer.
Yes. Now, so the thought conditions itself, and now it may be conditioned in a certain situation or when a certain thought is there acting to give rise to a certain feeling, just as the dog gets conditioned when the bell rings, the saliva flows.
One of the conditions is that it has to have a feeling or it doesn't get that kind of energy that makes
Well, it's conditioned, so that we say, and under those conditions it acts, you see, in that way. Right? That's the way we use the word conditioning. Right?
We use the analogy of a computer that just unloads the data that's been stored in it.
What do you mean unload?
Well, you push a button and you get back the material that's been stored, whatever it may be.
Yeah, but the computer may do all sorts of things. It may operate machinery. It may produce more programs. It may produce a typed copy, or it may connect to the telephone and to another computer. There are all sorts of responses that are open to it according to the programmer. And the same is true of our conditioning. But I'm picking on one particular one, that a certain thought or a certain perception will be there will be a conditioning in the memory to give rise to a certain feeling. Like if you have been frightened by a certain thing in the past, there's the memory of that feeling associated to that thing. And so when this thing is stirred up, then the memory is stirred up of the feeling, and up comes the feeling, right? Which may or may not be appropriate now because it's merely a memory.
We have a tendency to give that feeling a deep meaning that causes the conditioning to continue when we add a little more to it.
We lose track of the fact that we aren't able to even follow the fact that it has arisen out of the thought, right? And therefore, when it turns up, it seems to be independent. Now, if it were an independent feeling, it could be giving us, it either would be important in itself, or it could be giving us very significant information about ourselves or the world. But this way, it's not giving any significant information about anything.
Prior to thinking, that was the main information that an organism could have, is its feelings.
It's feelings, and then the thoughts started up from the feelings and refine them further, the information further. Saying, I feel danger, what is it, more precise? But suppose the feeling is excited from memory, then it may not have any significance at all, but thought begins to look for danger, and it may be led into a false trail.
When you were talking yesterday about the impulse to think.
Yes, well, there is an impulse for thought to take place. We could say there may be the intention or the impulse to think as well, which is something.
It's an acquired evolutionary thing. Once thought started to formulate.
Yeah, well, I think that the impulse to think, you see, gradually built up. I mean, it may be present in the animals too, but much more weakly.
Fight and flight impulses there as well, isn't it?
Well, that's another reflex. You see that given danger, you may fight or have fight or flight or else freeze, you see. And these are possible responses according to the situation, or may vary according to how you've been conditioned, which will be irrelevant.
You say that the impulse to think is in animals as well?
Well, certainly, and it seems to me it's in apes, chimpanzees, and dolphins and animals of that level.
Conditioning. Are you saying that perhaps some conditioning would be better done away with, and other conditioning should be observed?
Yes, that's right. Yes,
and evaluated.
Well, if you're driving a car, you're conditioned that red means stop, and you stop without thinking. Right? You start to, so it's faster, right? Now, on the other hand, if you spread that too far, saying a red flag means stop, that would be foolish, right?
You still have the choice to judge. You can judge.
Yeah, but if you see a red flag and you find yourself stopping, you don't ever get that far, but you might find yourself stopping automatically. And then you could say, this isn't making sense, right? Or say, see a red flower or whatever. But under certain conditions, red means stop, right? Now we have to say what goes wrong with this conditioning, you see. It can be a perfectly valid part of our process, or it can lead to deception.
So it's the inability to distinguish between a feeling which has valuable information about the world or oneself and a feeling which is just produced by...
Yes, or else even then, if the feeling is conditioned, it seems to be such valuable information that we don't know it's the conditioning, and therefore we can't seem to question it. It seems to be a factor.
What's needed is some ability to distinguish.
Yes, we'll put it that way. Lack of ability to come to that.
We're also unaware that we're being conditioned as we're thinking.
No, memory, the operation of memory is the one thing of which you're least aware. You see, when it gets in memory, you're not aware of it at all. It's only the responsive memory that you're aware of.
Right.
The reaction.
Once you see the response of memory, you can then begin to question whether that program is appropriate. And
Yeah, but when you see that it is the responsive memory, you see, how will you know? You see, we have to go into this carefully. How does one ever get to know this?
By proprioception.
Yes, but we're raising the question, okay, is the proprioception of thought possible? I'm proposing that it should be possible because it's another neurophysiological process, and why shouldn't it be possible? But I'm saying we have to try to see what is involved in making it actual.
So it seems, just to clear up a point, we can't really go at it from the other end of maybe trying to prevent things from going on in the memory, because there may have been a lot already inherited.
Well, not only that, but the memory may go down automatically. You may have a very likely held memory that doesn't condition you. Happen in a very heavy memory, which conditions you. A tremendous sense of necessity and emotion.
One word that never seems to have come up in this discussion is cognition, which to me means that place where the raw data coming in through the senses is transformed into something that gives meaning.
Yes,
Daniel scans his landscape constantly and gives meaning to it.
Yes, well, I feel that's another thing that happens. But I mean, if we try to put in too much at once.
Excuse me, it's in that area of cognition, of the transformation of data to thinking, thought, memory.
Yes.
That the confusion takes place.
But you see, there's no problem if we don't have memory confusing the issue. It is set up to take care of that. You see, I think genetically that knowing takes place, you see, as part of genetic structure.
Memory is part of the data.
But the memory introduces confusion. We want to see why and how. See, now we say you may get a feeling which is sort of originating, either getting real information originating in the emotional center thereabout, and you may get a feeling stirred up by memory. Now, if it's stirred up by memory, you don't see the memory, and therefore you judge it to be automatically, and not even consciously, an independent feeling of great importance. And then, if there is such a feeling, then the intellectual function should come along and judge it as to whether it's appropriate or not, and send a message, as it were, what to do with it, you see. But suppose the feeling is not coming from the emotional center, it's coming from the memory, right? From the conditioning. Therefore, that message is not going to do any good. As a matter of fact, it will do harm, because the message will introduce a lot of confusion. Nothing happens, basically. And then it seems to be a further proof that this feeling is there independently. See, it's really solid. No, it doesn't change. It's very stable. And you see, so the normal channel by which this thing would be taken care of now becomes a source of trouble. See, because what the whole system must get in contact with is the memory. It wants to change that. Getting in contact with the feeling will not change the memory, which will be other. Right. See, the feeling is of no importance. The only importance is it's confusing. That particular kind of feeling.
I can only express my personal experience that events in my life pushed me to a point where there was so much pain I had to look. Either I would dissolve into my conditioning, or whatever happened, I had to look at who I was and ask and find out that I was a lot of conditions put together. And that was the beginning of being able to look at my conditioning, see how it affected my life, see how fear kept me my own prisoner, and start from there. And
Yes, but I think, you see, what you're discussing is that we can see this happening on a certain level, abstractly. You see that I'm saying, how are we going to get this immediate sense of proprioception of the conditioning?
Well, something happens and you become angry or afraid. Let's say afraid.
Or angry, it doesn't matter, yeah.
It makes you afraid, right?
And it goes on the record, right?
Pardon me?
It goes on the record.
Right. normally when fear arises in the body, there's a whole adrenaline moves, everything moves. And from that, there's normally a feeling that something's necessary in terms of action. If you begin to question whether or not this feeling is coming from what you're observing, or whether it's coming from the memory, there might be a moment there where when you question, that you can identify whether it's coming from the environment or whether it's coming from the memory.
Now, how do you do that?
By watching the thought process that's transpiring in the moment.
Well, how can you tell it's coming from memory? You see, when the fear is intense, it seems to be quite real.
Well, for instance, if I'm having a conversation with someone and all of a sudden I feel that thing move, if I was paying attention, I might have seen a thought slip through that indicated to me that there was something to be afraid of here. And if the body moved as a result of that thought slipping through, then it came from the thought and not from what was in front of me.
Yes. But I think, you see, the question is how are we going to get the kind of immediate proprioception that you have of the movement of the hand between the intention and the movement, you see, because if there's a time delay, you say there's a thought, now I know that it's thought, that this will help somewhat, but it won't get to the whole thing.
Well, in what he was describing, see, he said this thought slipped through and he felt this movement in the body. That movement is a flag that indicates that something has gone awry. As soon as he felt that movement, he knows that that movement means that there was an inattention, that there was something isn't right in the setup. And so then he knows he has to start looking.
Also, there's a connection between thinking and the feeling in the body that is triggering for memory, as you say. But you're observing in a time delay that there is a definite connection between that thought and the movement in the body. And that there's a possibility that the whole thing is being distorted.
Yes, that's still an inference which will, I suggest, not be as immediate as what we're talking about.
I don't think
It seems that taking what's taking place in our experience as an indication of what's going on out there seems to be what's problematic. I mean, whether our felt sense rises out of how our background constells meaning now, right? I mean, in a sense, it seems to me that almost every situation that we come into, that our background is part of what's shaping how the meaning, right, that we're living. And so it seems like the problem in taking what's rising up in us as an indication of something out there or outside of the general way that meaning is cohering is problematic, because when we're attentive to this process of cohering meaning, it seems like if we keep taking up whatever's rising up in us and not giving value to some over something else, it will come into coherence.
Well, it doesn't. You see, suppose you have the incoherence, which you may feel in some sense. It's not very clear, right? And the incoherence is pervasive. You see that it affects all sorts of things. See, I don't think it's not all that easy when you have a really powerful disturbance of that kind, that it would come into coherence without something more. I mean, the actual ability to observe or to be aware of the relationship between the origin of the thought, the arising of the thought, and some impulse, intention, and the result.
The other thing is we don't realize that it's a conditioning that's causing, like if someone tells me, well, your comments here are stupid, there's an immediate flash of anger, and I don't even realize that I have conditioning that tells me no one can say that to me.
Yes, that's true, but you may not, now that you know that you have conditioning, but it still works, you see. You may realize that I've been conditioned to react that way with anger, and it will still work.
But when you start talking in terms of the conditioning and the unconditioning, I remember Krishnamurti used to use the analogy of to recognize that the house is on fire, and that when you recognize the house is on fire, it's almost as if on a scale of 10, if you were 50% conditioned and 50% unconditioned, suddenly you'd be 100% unconditioned and you take care of it.
Well, but people generally don't do that with really powerful anger or fear or panic.
I understand that. This is, again, that what you said yesterday, that keeps running around in my head, that intention to attention, that act to attend, that aspect that obviously cannot be learned so much as done, so that you are not being driven so much by the condition, less by deconditioned, if you will.
Yeah, I think, I see that. But there's a problem in there. What I to attend to, you see.
Attend to the attending.
I suggest that we have to attend to the relation between the impulse for thought and the result of it. You see, now we don't know what that means. I mean, we have an abstract idea of what it means, but we don't know what it actually means, at least in general, people don't know. And,
if we don't take the amplitude of our response as an indication of what's going on out there, but in a sense, internal barometer of how meaning forms at this moment, then in a sense that is a proprioception coming in. It's a proprioception in attention. It's like we have a barometer, we have this feedback, an incredibly sensitized feedback that gives us a way of feeling how we're forming meaning now.
Are you saying that we have something within us that tells us what the value of our thoughts are? And that we should use that as a kind of barometer? And yet we have this tremendous crisis facing us that we almost have no feeling about, and yet if somebody insults us, we get tremendously incensed.
I'm not saying about any objective value, but about how we evaluate, right? How meaning, how we form meaning now.
The value and the charge are kind of similar, aren't they?
Are you saying that that's something that's of value in this question, or is the problem? Because how we value things seems to be the problem, because this fellow said if somebody...
Only if we take it as an indication of something objectively true, only if we
not
take...
necessarily. You can have a subjective value perfectly well.
This fellow said if somebody told him his comments were stupid, he would probably have a very large charge, and I know that feeling.
Yes, well, you see the meaning. The point is, it's the meaning that does it. You see, you apprehend in a very complex process. We probably don't understand. The brain apprehends, the mind apprehends the meaning of this insult, which it might not apprehend if it were in another language, or it could also apprehend it from the tone. And apprehending the meaning, which is that you are an idiot, that this central thing, which is supremely important and glorious and so on, is actually an idiot. It upsets the whole thing. It's the meaning that upsets it all, you see. Now, it all happens very fast, and by the time you know from the past that I have reacted again, it's already left its mark in the synapses.
Can you say that the I is meaning?
It's part of meaning. I means what? It means me, myself, and I. It means the supreme importance. It means all this is done.
That the I, my I at the present time, is an accumulation of meaning, that this is how I present and represent myself to the world, is a totality of meaning.
Yes, and the meaning is essential to the reaction.
Right, that's what this gentleman, when Michael mentioned that, he said, if my meaning is such, my meaning of my I is such that I am incensed by what just got said, I will react.
Yes, it's not just the thought process reacts, you see.
So what was introduced, the only reason I jumped on that is the idea that we have this internal indicator of what's what's valuable or not valuable, and it seems to be the very thing that's causing us all the
Not
problems.
what's valuable, but how we value. It's an indication of how we value.
All right, so to me that would be the problem, rather than an indication
Well,
of the
how will
problem.
it become self-correcting if we're not awake to
Self-correcting
how
might
we're
be the wrong way
valuing?
to go about it.
I have the feeling that something extremely important is being discussed, but we're just sort of shouting at each other.
The temperature has gone up, you see. Now we're meeting to raise the temperature, hasn't it?
Maybe if you try to hold the temperature down, the thing.
No, well, that's the first notice that it's gone up and not go down. Right?
I think the conditioning gets in the way to stop the very important thing that started in the very moment the conductor Bohm started speaking. And the rest is just the conditioning that gets in the way at this moment to interfere.
Well, the conditioning does interfere, but we're trying to find out how and why and what can be done about it.
I'd like to say how I receive what Risa is saying. You seem, Risa, I don't know, you seem to me to embody what you're talking about. And it seems that when you receive something and you check, you use this word organismically, and I've heard it several times the last few days. It seems like you check within yourself, not putting up some sort of outside objective thing that people object to as some sort of a value thing that we get in trouble with, but merely being honest within yourself and not putting the thing back outside the way thought does to begin with and makes it fragmented. You keep it whole and you take everything, you take responsibility for all of your feelings and all of your thoughts. You don't reject them, you don't make them objects. You accept the entire thing, and you accept in a way. I mean, you have, to me, like a beautiful system that it's, you know, just kind of expands out to the world, and you don't use that outside objective thing, but you really mull it inside. And I think that kind of an attitude would be the very thing that would be self-correcting and where you would get in line with thought. I mean, that's the way I receive you. And anyway.
May I speak? And regarding that same thing, and particularly what that fellow back there said. See, they're saying that when there's thinking, and we were saying, so it is a material process, and so the material process is always accompanying the thinking. And so that I have the option, if I see the necessity of it, you might say, have the intention to constantly monitor the material aspect of thought. And in doing that, when I'm speaking and somebody says something and they look at me in a certain way, so that the reaction begins, immediately the material aspect of that reaction is noted. And it's like a fire warning. Attention to that material aspect, move away from the words as objects and take care of this. That does not solve the fundamental problem, but it allows for an equilibrium out of perhaps which a fundamental problem can be approached.
Dr. Bohm, could I ask a question about proprioception? Now, when a person flatters someone else and says your comments are wonderful and so forth, we get a glow. And we're aware of the glow. Just like someone tells us your comments are stupid, we're aware of the anger. Is proprioception, it seems, would be somewhat involved in just being aware of the anger or the glow or the good feeling. But are you talking about proprioception would be to become aware of the release of the stored material that tells us how we're going to react to flattery and how we're going to react to uncomplimentary remarks, so that we always react in the same way, either with a glow at flattery or with intense anger at uncomplimentary remarks? Is it the release of the stored material that...
No, I wouldn't say that.
Is it coming from the outside or from the inside? I mean, in order for me to get those reactions that have just been described, don't I have to repeat that internally in order to make the machine work?
So, yes, that's what it would come to. But you see, the first, when it happens in the beginning, you can't stop it. Now, the reaction is due to the fact that there is no proprioception. You see, it's not to say there is a reaction and we apply proprioception or anything, but if there is no proprioception, then automatically the thing is given the wrong meaning. You see, it has something independent.
It's not that it needs to revivify the memory. It's just
the
charge that keeps the conditioning sort of spiked in terms of. I mean, it seems like that is where the change needs to occur.
Well, you see, the point is that we don't see that memory is operating. We may know it abstractly by inference, and that's already too late. Now, it has already affected the conditioning. It has affected the synapses chemically. And after you've been angry, you're all disturbed for quite a while. It may simmer a long time. Your thought may not go straight, or fear. And the difficulty is, I'm saying that thought, though a material process, is not proprioceptive. Now, if the body were as unproprioceptive as thought, we would not be able to move, you see, or not be able to live. And there would be a problem. The person would not be moving coherently, but you would say the problem is that there's a lack of proprioception.
If you say that thought is the one that conditions itself, then why is proprioception needed to untangle the conditioning that the thought made in the first place?
Well, something must untangle. You see, thought itself, being conditioning, is not intelligent enough to untangle what it has entangled.
No, but that thought, I heard you say before, that thought is the one that conditions itself.
Thought is a process that conditions itself. In this process, conditioning keeps on adding, yeah.
So if it conditions itself, is the possibility there that it can uncondition itself too?
Well, no, there's no visible reason why it should ever be able to uncondition itself. That is, if you just take a ball of cord and tangle it up, you can keep on doing that and it will never disentangle. You see, it takes a kind of observation or intelligence to disentangle it.
But then you tangled it or untangled it.
Well, no, it tangled itself. This is important. You see, this is another one of those features of thought that creates confusion. Thought says something happened, but thought is very modestly says, I'm only telling you the truth about it. And you are the one who did it, you see. Where it says, I'm telling you what the choices are, you are the one who chooses. But thought itself makes the choices on the basis of conditioning, right? So, you see, the thought process goes just like a computer program. It just goes. You see, it's part of the material of the world. Anymore, a planet goes, the wind blows, the sun shines, and the thought process goes. According to whatever its structure is.
Could you tell us materially how the thought does this? Is it something in the corpus callosum? Is there a defect in the wiring?
Well, no, it's a function has arisen which we are not pre-wired for. We have to learn to deal with. You see.
Yeah, it seems like we need to talk more about time in some way.
Well, yes, but in the first case, it's very simple that if you are conditioned, something happens which stirs up one side of the conditioning, it will stir up the other, you see, because there's an association. You see, once the dog is conditioned by the bell, then the bell will stir up the saliva, right? Now that is just association. I mean, that's almost a kind of reflex. It could be duplicated in wiring, in computers. Right? Now, it just goes. You see, the knee-jerk reflex, it just goes. It's not that you jerk your knee. But if you hit the knee, it jerks. Now, but the thought process says no. The thought process says it is I who have done it.
Yeah, it seems to create the I that's done it all.
It creates the impression of an I who has done it. And it also it attributes itself to that I which it has created.
It seems there seems an important distinction between other types of sensory awareness and that which thought mediates. In the sense that All the rest of our senses really evolve for right now contact. I mean, I don't taste something except now.
Yes, they can make mistakes, but these mistakes, we call them honest mistakes, they will be corrected once they're aware of the mistake. The mistake of this kind of thought is that it is not corrected, but defended, right?
Well, yeah, it seems to be diffused into all of in some kind of not now.
Yeah.
Right, like it's whereas the rest of our senses are evolved to allow us to feel and touch and sense and hear and smell and see. Right now, thought comes in to extend our awareness into the contingencies not now that are present now.
Yes, it's the residue of the past which is now actively and present.
Right. So, I mean, in a child, they're learning. It seems like they don't live in time in the same way, and learning that's timeless is absolute.
Yes, well, I mean, Krishnamurti said thought is time. He said it's a form of time, and in fact, thought has invented time as a means of keeping track of the order of succession. So Leibniz has said time is space is the order of coexistence, and time is the order of successive existence.
So if you carry that, what this gentleman is saying, we wanted to talk about time a little further, and the I cannot distinguish between a feeling and a felt, or thought and thinking. That the talk, Krishnamurti again used to talk in terms of the fact that we create some psychological past and some psychological future, but the mechanism itself has no way of distinguishing between that which is now and that which is yesterday and that which is...
No very clear way. I mean, it might, in some cases, know about it, but it doesn't distinguish it immediately.
The proprioceptive action that is lacking at the present time be somehow connected with the inability to distinguish between the psychological past
and this, I think, cycles back on what we were trying to get at earlier, that maybe the barometer of that distinction is energetic. It isn't Naplandic in the sense that we may not be able to make the distinction solely by how we can see the relationships in the map, but rather the acoustics of being here.
Yeah, well, I think to have proprioception, we need some kind of feedback, we'll put it that way. The thought process does not have the right kind of feedback at the moment to make...
The impulse and the thinking.
The impulse and the result feeding back. Now, it is this feedback, you see, that the impulse to move the feedback, the information, and the feeling that they are both one and the other. They're all part of one, right?
Is there a way of just programming this? Is a way of being out?
Well, it's not. What's missing is that we don't see that it's happening. You see, it will not do any harm if we can see what's happening. You see, so otherwise we get the wrong meaning, and the meaning then acts according to the meaning. Now, you see, whether something is independent or dependent is a crucial feature of meaning, right? Now, there are certain cues we take to mean that it's independent. If we push on it, it stays by itself. It's sort of powerful. It acts stable. And dependent is if we push on it, it moves. It turns aside, and various other criteria. So, according to those criteria, then we may say it may mean to us this is dependent or independent, and our action is immediately and automatically accordingly.
This presupposes that in order to do this, you've already got to be outside of it. Otherwise, we're just going to go round and round all the time.
Yeah, but you see, where would we be outside of? I don't know. You see,
I don't mean we, but there has to be some way of looking that is not caught in the...
Yes, we said there must be some unconditioned way of looking, but to think of it as outside or inside might be misleading.
What I mean is it can't be caught in this reaction that's...
There has to be some...
think that we're looking...
So our looking has to be unconditioned, but if we make a sharp division between conditioned and unconditioned, then we face ourselves with the problem of here we are conditioned and we've got to cross to the other shore.
Can we go back then to what again, this notion that this gentleman wanted to talk about time, that the looking that Sarah was suggesting, that outside or inside is really some sort out of time, that the time that it's not conditioned by time.
Yes, well, I feel that we can make some steps before we bring in time. You see that we can learn something. You see now, we need a feedback and a reflection. Now, you see, one way of getting feedback with the senses is through a mirror. You see, so if you try to shave yourself without a mirror, very, very unclear. It doesn't work, right? Now, you establish a mirror now, which is a feedback, but there's some very interesting things happen. You see, you do not attempt to shave the image in the mirror. You don't treat that as the independent reality, which is what we're doing with the feelings, right? The felt. Right? See, once the felts are considered to be independent reality, it would be right to try to deal with them. But in fact, they are not the origin of the problem. The origin of the problem is the memory. So memory acts, produces felts or anything, you see, and but it has to feed back as part of the same process. Now, if you take this shaving in the mirror, the first thing that happens is you won't right away know that you can shave. You see, it takes some skill. Right? You don't do just the opposite of what you did when you're to things that are not a mirror. You see, you have to learn this. You see that. Now, the first step in learning, I'd say, is a kind of play of thought that you move, and then see how a movement of the hand, which has an intention, is related to the shift of the image, and then as you move toward the face, you can see you want to move to get the image and the brush in a certain position in the image, and you've got to get your hand to move in such ways to do that. You see, you have a kind of play, first of all, to see that relationship. So the purpose of the movement is perception and not the result, right? You see, in the first instance. And now, you see, if you find that a certain kind of movement brings you closer, then what you do is more of that, and then it may begin to take you away, then you try something else. You see, so therefore there is a kind of nonverbal learning, right, of how to fine-tune the intention to move the hand.
When you look at yourself on a television screen, if you've got a camera pointed at you, you're looking at yourself on a monitor. It's confusing.
Yeah. Or someone said yesterday, and I'm not sure if they said here, if you look carefully at yourself in the mirror, you become confused because it doesn't.
With the television, you're actually seeing not what you would see in the mirror. You're seeing the reverse of it.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter whether it's the reverse. It's not.
But if I move this hand, and on the screen I see the other hand going momentarily.
And then you have to learn to correct for that. You see that? What?
He said it's conditioned by my looking into a mirror.
Yeah.
If you put a child in front of the camera and show her the monitor, she has a delightful time for a few moments just trying to acclimate herself to the reverse image, which is being projected to her reverse image.
Yeah.
She's used to looking in a mirror.
You see, there are a great many cases of that kind. If you take lenses which are prismatic, they may shift the image. And then you find you're moving to the wrong place because you have learned a certain connection between the image and the retina and the movement of the hand, and you have to relearn it by trying it. And then eventually you see the world back as it was. And then when you take off the lens, you see the world wrong for a while. And of course, the extreme case of that is the lens that turns things upside down, and eventually the consciousness rights itself. And when you take it off again, it'll take time to come back. So. Therefore, you see, to see certain things, we have to learn how to learn the perception of certain things, right, in a nonverbal way. Come back. So, therefore, you see, to see certain things, we have to learn how to learn the perception of certain things, right, in a nonverbal way.
In fact, but perhaps. There's a question we were talking about before about thought and self, is that in some way it's as if the self is some learning mirror, thought is constructed to learn with.
Well, it could be. You see, there's the intention, and the mirror may be the feelings in the body, or it may be something outside, it may be other people. And any feedback between the intention and the result is a mirror.
The point being that without the feedback, then you can't
Yeah.
differentiate awareness.
Yes, you see, there has to be, in the case of the woman who had a stroke and lost the feedback, then she had the motor nerves, but she couldn't tell that it wasn't something entirely independent, right? No, you see, she couldn't distinguish between dependence on the intention and independence. And without that distinction, you're not viable. And that's an immediate distinction, which doesn't take time to think, right? Once you learn it.
Well, we leave time out for a sec, but with respect to extending our other senses, there is immediate feedback. With respect to extending ourselves in time, there isn't.
Well, let's take thought. You see that in the case of thought, you see if a certain, the thought may take a short period of time, but if the feedback occurs during that period of time, that's good enough, right? You see that you will get a simultaneous sense of the result and the. See, like saying light, you see, it's very fast. It's essentially instantaneous for all ordinary movements. If something were moving very quickly, then we'd have to take into account that light was a delay, right? Or going to the moon or Mars, then the delay becomes very significant. So, but for here in this room, the delay is insignificant, and therefore we can treat the thing as instantaneous.
And if the conditioning is so thick and clouded, does not listen to the feedback, ignores it.
Well, there's going to be a problem there. I'm making a map of this process. I'm drawing an analogy between this process and one that you know is much more familiar, which is when you do something to your face by being aided by a mirror, right? That you have to learn how to do that. Now, when you're learning how to do that, we may have some conditioning which resists doing it, but because the hand is conditioned to do it in one way, but it's not all that serious, and eventually you get through it, right? Perhaps in a very short time.
The learning is a different process than the conditioning. When you sit in front of a mirror and the first time you try to comb your hair backwards and everything, there's a whole process, learning, watching, getting feedback. At the same time, there's another process saying, boy, this is stupid. The conditioning is operating, I can't understand this. I feel really retarded or something like that. But the learning isn't paying attention to the conditioning.
Well, it may even be learning about the conditioning at the same time. I don't know.
Is the distinction between
you may
and conditioning just an after-the-fact observation, or what's the difference in the process of conditioning and learning?
Well, that's where I'm saying there is a difference.
Yeah,
First, if we can
that's something to
accept
really
that.
go into.
See, there's learning, like you say, in front of. I remember learning how to use a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was like this.
Yeah.
And the learning was a process of observation,
Yes.
motor nerve.
Observation, not only what you're doing, but how it's related to your intention.
Going through a whole.
And then you gradually developed a finer tuned intention.
There isn't any of that problem.
There's no need to do that. It happens immediately. Right?
But concurrent with that learning was a feeling about not being able to operate.
Yeah. Yes.
The feeling was the condition.
Yeah. Well, you had the conditioning was operating in another way, interfering with this. See, in the beginning there was no proprioception. Now we learned how to proprioceive, if you want to put it, in this case. Huh?
So you're saying that there's the possibility of another movement in the brain or in existence that isn't relying on the conditioning to tell it what's going on.
Yeah, it's got to have a free play. If it's conditioned, to the extent that it's conditioned, it will not be able to have free play to explore what might actually touch the whatever, in this case touch the header, and in the other case touch the memory. Right?
And almost every reaction I see happening to this statement in this room is relying on the conditioning to try to figure it out.
Yeah. But there's a possibility of learning, which is not, it may include the verbal. We learn about words too, but even when we learn how to use words, the learning is nonverbal, right? It's the same nature as learning how to shave, right? Or use the mirror.
The word is a mirror for the whole thing.
Yeah, the word is itself a sound, a real thing, a real sound, which is a mirror.
What is this process that's aware of itself without being conditioned?
Yes, well, that's the same as when you move your hand, you see. The awareness is the awareness of the relation between intention and the result. Right? and which is immediate. I mean, I'm saying it's a fact. I don't want to try to go into all the physiology of it. I don't know.
When you were giving this analogy of a mirror, are you indicating that the observation is something independent of thought?
Well, it's not conditioned by thought. You see, it may pick up. It doesn't depend on thought. It may have a connection with thought in the sense that it may pick up thought, what the content is, but it is not controlled by that content as ordinary conditioned thought is. See, when you're angry, the content of the thought is controlled by the conditioning. You're not free to think clearly, right? You're compelled to distort.
Mirror can be perhaps a little limiting here because it's sense of just the visual, and we're really saying that maybe there's an analogy between the mirror and a three-dimensional acoustical felt sense, knowing, seeing, feedback bubble.
Yes, there may be many dimensions. You see, it may be more than three.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. We'll just take it from 1 to 3 though for a second.
Yeah, so now the point is that the conditioning, when it operates in thought, the impulse is not conscious. You don't have any intention to be aware of to connect up with the result, and therefore the result will automatically be attributed as independent. Right? So then you may know later you've made a mistake, but it's already too late. You see, because the whole chemistry has been upset. And it will not go straight from there on. So all right. So that really, you see, that this is what's going wrong with thought, and the attempt, under the assumption that this feeling is arising in the emotional center, the attempt to correct it by saying, to say it's an inappropriate feeling, it should go away. It doesn't, because it's arising in the memory, and the attempt to send a message to the emotional center to give up that feeling, not only doesn't make it give up, but it muddles things up a great deal, right? Because you're sending that message when there's nothing to which it can apply.
When we have anger, then to try to send a message that you want the anger to move, you want to move yourself from the anger, yes. That's an inappropriate message.
Yeah, because you're asking the emotional center to stop, but the emotional center is being compelled to produce anger by the memory. Just as a program might compel you. I think there was a fellow called Delgado who connected up a radio transmitter to the brain of a bull deep down, and I remember it. And the bull would charge a certain way, certain electrodes would make the bull charge. And it suddenly, with almost no time at all, it would stop if you pressed another electrode. You see, the bull was compelled. The movement of the brain there was compelled to do that by the impulse. Right? So a similar impulse could come out of memory, although not that fast.
An energetic snowball.
If we stay with the anger or stay with the flattery, then is that going to reveal something to us?
Yes, well, we have to stay with it. In a sense, if you move away from it, you haven't the time, you see, to establish this feedback and become aware of how it works. You see, staying with it is in some sense essential, but at the same time not being carried away too far.
Isn't the moving away from it an illusion?
Oh, it's an illusion, yes, but it's good enough to confuse you, right?
This radio transmitter that keeps sending impulses to
it really goes, it's not radio, it goes through the nerves.
But I mean,
it's a telephone transmitter.
What we need is a different intelligent movement, because thought is not an intelligent movement.
Yeah, well, not by itself, it requires...
What is this other not by itself?
Well, I mean, in the case of the mirror, shaving, the reflex of shaving, or the reflex of dealing with things that are in front of you.
So it's perception and learning and intention.
Yes.
And attention.
Yes, you actually are aware of the intention to move your hand in a certain way, and aware of how the actual movement, watching the image, how the actual movement is not fitting the intention, or is fitting, or coming closer.
And in that particular case, proprioception is a problem.
But it comes about, you see, that... And then
it's fed into the proprioceptive movement, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Proprioception says it works this way, and the mirror says no.
Yeah, but by learning, the whole thing is corrected, you see.
By learning.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's like sometimes to talk about some kind of new movement or new intelligence may be misleading, and that yes, we could say that that happens or could happen or could be a result of, but ultimately, maybe what we need to be talking about is what kind of mirror environment can we...
Yes, we need the mirror, and also we need the intention to be aware, you see.
It seems to me that we also need a shift in where we put our attention. It's because I hear a shift in attention from the impulse to the result, to the relationship between the impulse and the result. Just as that which learns in the mirror process, that which is proprioceptive is that which apprehends the relationship between the two, and that's the learning. So that there's this shift in our attention from being attentive to these two separate objects in some sense, and this feedback loop that moves through time or between them to the relationship.
Yes, the relationship is one of dependence, right? And the result depends on the intention. And the intention may then later be affected by the result. It changes.
And somehow that's how we can know immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How we can perceive.
Yes. So the process is aware of itself, isn't it? You see, there's no separate observer. See, it's one of the fictions of thought to say that whenever perception takes place, there must be a separate perceiver who does the thing. And you see, but that just is simply a part of our conditioning. It's really entirely wrong.
It seems like what we're using here too is a lot of word pictures, a lot of intellectualization to try to describe something that, whereas what's really required is perception rather than the intellect. Trying to find so many different word pictures.
Well, but the word picture, you have to perceive the meaning of this word picture, you see. See, whenever you get a diagram, you have to perceive its meaning, or else it gets nowhere. And you have to learn its meaning, really.
If the intention doesn't create a mirror to be able to vivify the experience of this relationship that you're intending to be aware of, then how...
Well, you see, I think the trouble with thought is that the mirror is there, but the intention is not aware. You see, the intention to think, or for thought to take place, is not aware, and therefore we have nothing to connect the result with. You see, the result is the feeling, or for example, or the result is something else.
So the intention in this case is an orientation.
Yes, well, see, in any movement of the body, the intention is a sort of more and more fine-tuned orientation. Like the piano player has got to orient that movement in a very fine way, right? And to begin with, a conditioned movement of the hand will not do it, you see.
Supposing you had a circumstance where you were constantly around people that make you angry, right? And that's a normal circumstance because you're maybe in a business situation or wherever it would be where it would happen often enough, right?
In most places it happens. Yeah.
So, supposing you come to the weekend and you find yourself on Saturday reflecting on what may have transpired on Friday or earlier in the week, and you find the body getting as disturbed as if the individual was right in the room.
Yes, well, they're beginning to move in the direction I would like to suggest, you see.
Yeah. If you were to do that on Saturday when there was no individual in the room, and instead of just letting it go, the anger, start to experiment with it, that is to see the relationship between the fact that you're presenting an image and the body is responding to that image as though it were actually there, as though the actuality of it were there.
Yes, you could say what the experiment is really another word for play, that something must happen to explore this connection, you see, so you can learn it. So now you see, what we could suggest is, unless we have an intention, we have nothing to observe. Now, so let us produce the intention by repeating the words which will capture the thought that makes you angry, right? It makes you keep on being angry. Right? We know what it all is, right? You see, so you will find as you repeat the words that the anger is building up, right? And therefore you can get a feeling of some sort of connection, right? A relationship.
Yes.
Now, we're not using the words for the sake of producing a desired result. The words are part of for the sake of perception, for the sake of learning. We see that the words are turning the machinery slowly. When you're first angry, it's going too fast anyway. Then it simmers down, but it's still there. And then by bringing in the words, you can build it up a bit and see that the intention to think these thoughts and the anger are connected. Right?
Might it not be just as well if you started with remembering pictures?
Pictures, I mean thoughts, pictures are just as good. I mean, but anything which symbolizes or stands for or represents what we're talking about will do, right?
There could be other ways than just words.
No, but the easiest is usually the word, you see, because the word, in fact, is usually the major cause of anger, but a picture could do it too.
So you're saying it needs to be slowed down?
Yeah, and it does slow down, you see. Anger does slow down when the occasion has gone, but it's still simmering.
So when it's slowed down, and if it becomes ordered, it is as you practice this, and it is slowed down. If that becomes orderly, that perception, are you talking about insight occurring through order?
Well, just simply the same as you learn to use the mirror, that you're gradually learning this connection, a nonverbal connection between the words and the feelings.
Will you ever get to the point where you recognize that it is just an image and it is not the actual
Well, perhaps, yes. But see, the first point is that when you have the intention to get to a point, this is already not doing it, right? You see, in other words, you're not playing. The intention to produce the result is going to produce an image of the result and is going to muddle it up again.
So you just experiment, and that from the experimentation and an observation of this experimentation as it's going on, with the intention to learn, play.
Yes.
That observation itself should present an intelligent.
Well, the same as the observation in the mirror, you're gradually getting that feeling for the connection.
Does the notion of the witness come in here? Isn't that what we're talking about?
Well, but it's the important point is to witness certain connection.
It's the intention to attention,
Yes.
which I perceive as being a witness, as an observer above almost.
Well, but I don't know if it's above. You see, it may begin apparently above, but when it's actually happening, it's just, you don't sense the observer anymore.
Complicating this more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
Why do we have to have an intention? Why don't we simply look? Why do we have to have an intention to look? An intention to be aware, an intention to examine. Do it, for goodness sake. Why are we
talking about
so
a
many
kind of
different procedures?
Well, you see, this has been suggested for a long, long time, and it generally doesn't happen. You see, it's not. If you have to say, what will you look at? You see, you can't say, I look. You see, we don't say what we're going to look at. Now we have to learn what it is we're looking at.
Why? Whatever comes up is what you're looking at. You're not deciding, I'm going to look at this or that or the other. You're looking at what's happening in yourself.
Yeah, but then the thing which you have to look at may not be present. You see, it may not be in consciousness.
But if you continue to look, won't you see that?
Not necessarily, you see, because if you keep on trying to look and it doesn't come to consciousness, then it's there. You see, you could say, I've looked and tried. And every time anger comes along, I'm still in the same boat, right?
So I understand this as having an informed looking. That's where this notion of a map comes into play. The looking is to see the connection between the memory and the result of the memory, which we don't generally see. So it's to be informed, to look into that.
If you look at the memory and continue to look at the memory, it will tell
No,
its story.
it's not to look at the memory, it's to look at the fact that memory produces results in the organism.
But that's
maybe the word intention is being perceived as an intellectual process.
No, intention is what you feel, right?
I understand that, but maybe just disposition is to be disposed to a specific way I'm trying to defuse the word intention, or to look at the word intention maybe a little differently. It's an attitude.
Maybe that's the whole key. It's where we place our intention, and what we need to be careful with is just that. You know, let's not say intention is this panacea. Let's try to define what our intention is, because our intention is going to drive what we pay attention to.
But are we separate
And-
from intention? Is there we directing that attention?
We can direct the attention.
Are
The
we
intention.
separate from it?
Well, that's what I mean by trying to find another word like disposition. Are you separate from your disposition? You're disposed to a certain activity.
Or decision.
You're not separate from it.
Yeah, well, how do you, suppose you start to think, you see, what makes you, what do you do to start to think?
I don't know that it never stops.
No, well, no, you see, thought goes on, but suppose you say, I'm going to think about something.
Well, then I have an intention to
think.
Yes.
And then you're aware that it's thought going on.
I have an intention to direct my thinking process to a specific.
Yes, and in that case, you can be aware that the result is coming out of the intention.
Okay, so essentially, what you're doing is applying proprioception to the situation. Much like I want to move my hand, I want to think about something, therefore I can direct my thought processes to that specific. It's a form of proprioception.
Yeah.
You're asking us to change we already have an intention in thought. That intention is to keep thought going at all costs and protect the image it produces at all costs. We're being asked to change that intention or to be aware of that intention.
Well,
there already is an intention that's operating immensely.
But prior to that,
Go on anyway?
Well, I don't know anything about it.
What
seems to be
What do? You start thinking, or you thinking emerges in your consciousness.
But the whole cycle of thought is to keep itself going and to protect this image that it's projecting. Now
But
we're being asked.
But why?
Well, I don't want to get into why. I just wanted.
No, but see.
Finish it.
Okay.
And now we're being asked to have a different intention as to see the process of thought, which was never, ever introduced into this equation before. It was always saying thought is, it's doing its thing, and the thing it's doing is protecting and augmenting this reality called me. That's the way it's been operating in my life for the last 500 years. Now somebody is saying, look, that intention is producing all these incoherent, destructive results within me and within the world. Is there a different way for thought to be aware of itself? Isn't that what we're being asked here to consider, or am I way off the beam?
Could we say that we have the intention to learn about this?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we're being asked to do.
Yes, we have to have the intention to learn, but also learn what, you see.
Whatever's going.
Yeah, but all sorts of things are going on, you see, and many of them quite illusory.
But don't we have the intention, first of all, not to suffer, not to have
Yeah,
pain?
I wouldn't call it intention. I'd say that happens as almost automatic.
Right, that's there right from the beginning.
Yeah.
But then somehow the way we're going about thing, that happens. And so automatically we have the intention to try to clarify what is going on.
Yeah.
It seems we have this intention, we don't have to acquire it.
Well, we don't have we don't, we're not aware, when thought is taking place from the conditioning, we're not aware of any intention. See, there's an impulse to think, which we're probably not aware of either. It just goes, right, from like a reflex from one thing to another.
The key is that it may not be conscious.
Yeah, the thing driving it may not be conscious.
What seems to occur to me then is that what we might need to do is to really focus on what our underlying values are in our intention, because that could be the key.
No, you see, values are conscious, and that's where.
Well, then it may or may not be.
No, they may not be, and I think that our intentions can be quite unconscious. But if we make a conscious intention to examine the values out of which we make judgments, then we can start to have some movement, perhaps in directions, results of which we want.
Yes, but if the values are coming out of the conditioning, then you can't do it. You see, you're raising the question of meaning now. You see, the word meaning has three meanings, as it were. One of them is significance. It signifies something. And another is value. It means a lot to me. It's the same as it has high value. And the third is purpose or intention. That I mean to do it. It's the same as I intend to do it. Or it's my purpose. So these are sort of fused in meaning. Right? Now, if these meanings are emerging from the conditioning, they may be totally inappropriate. The automatic meaning will just add to the confusion. The automatic values. See, most of our values probably function automatically in society. People are not even aware where they're coming from.
But isn't this the right track, though, to start to get in touch and to start to examine what the values, the underlying values are that we are operating from, so that we can move to a place where our values are chosen, truly chosen, and not just a reflex?
Yes, well, we have to find what are the values in the reflex.
You proposed this earlier, and it kind of just went right by.
Wow.
I felt. Well, you proposed that the conversation I thought you were trying to get at with respect to intention was a kind of pervasive intention to be experimenting with our experiences.
Yes, exploring.
If you go that route, then you don't even have to look at the values as specifically. You just have to begin to see how those values are formulated in our day-to-day.
Playground.
Yeah.
So the
It's
claim
the
is-
how that happens that you suddenly discover how arbitrary the howness of it is in our lives.
Yeah, these values are arbitrary or contingent, and we treat them as necessary and unavoidable.
Mary was
What?
talking about.
Yeah, well, we must break in a few minutes. Well, go ahead.
I wondered if she wasn't talking about maybe just being choicelessly aware of what's happening, because it's by choosing that we get into trouble, choosing to move away from the reaction that we're experiencing. I don't want to experience anger. I want to hide or conceal my anger.
But what makes you choose it? You see, the conditioning may determine the choice, so you're not really choosing.
Well, but it still seems that the choosing is what maybe false, but by just staying aware, there's a great deal of clarity that comes in.
Well, if you say choose what's happening, you say that this is what I want, this has high value, that's what it means, right? And I would try to restrict myself to this, but that value may occur from the conditioning, you see. When the conditioning is operating, there is no freedom to choose, but there's an impression that there is freedom. Now, you see, when it comes to choices of objects, various things you want to buy, it may be conditioned. The advertising industry is aimed at that, but in principle, you could choose intelligently, you see, according to some criteria. But when it comes to the process of thought, this choice has no meaning. But perhaps we should break it off here. It's already 20 past 11.